Yes, I know. I know from your point of view this looks like a useless video, because the answer is yes. Of course, the two affixes are garbage, whoever has designed them, and whichever conglomerate of people approved these two affixes to be introduced into the game shall suffer the worst of evils in their afterlife. However, let's try to discuss about it for a second. This expansion, Blizzard has introduced a couple brand new affixes, technically 3 also with entangling, but nobody cares about entangling, so we're just talking about Afflicted and Incorporeal. Many other changes went through when Blizzard was sort of rebooting the affixes. Many were cut. Many, happily disappeared from the pool of affixes, like for example, Goodbye Necrotic, it was not good to see you, and a few other that were also made significantly easier over time, like Bursting. Bursting used to not be able to be dispelled. Bursting used to scale with your max HP, and Bursting used to scale endlessly with key level. Now instead it's dispellable, it doesn't scale with your max HP, and it stops scaling in damage past A plus 15. So it's also been trivialized. You had plenty of others like Raging being nerfed, Bolstering being nerfed, stacks depleting over time, etc, etc. Most of the affixes, we can say, even before we start hating on Afflicted and Incorporeal, most of the other affixes we can praise Blizzard for making them more manageable, making them easier to deal with across the board. However, Afflicted and Incorporeal from the get-go had some issues, which is of course, number one, you need to have some type of hard crowd control to be able to deal with Incorporeal, and you need to have some type of dispel to deal with Afflicted. This immediately starts cutting out several specs and classes that cannot properly deal with any of these types of requirements. The classic, of course, are warriors and DKs. That's one of the main glaring problems of that affix. But of course, then you have something like Afflicted, and you have a warlock that cannot deal with Afflicted. You have a hunter that cannot deal with it. You have a rogue that cannot deal with it. Again, warriors that cannot deal with it. This, of course, immediately highlighted the problems that this makes it a black and white yes or no barrier on certain classes able to deal with them and others that simply cannot. Afflicted, you either have a curse, poison, disease, dispel, or you are screwed. So if you're a warrior, if you're a DK, if you're a hunter, if you're a rogue, if you're a warlock, you just don't do anything to them. Same goes for Incorporeal, where you need some kind of hard crowd control. Not just some kind of hard crowd control, like say a 4-second stun or a 5-second stun like a warrior. You need a long crowd control to just click it once and forget about the Incorporeal mob, like most of the specs, except for warrior, which become highlighted because they cannot deal with both of them. Hunters don't have a dispel for Afflicted, but they have an easy freezing trap for Incorporeal. Warlocks don't have a dispel for Afflicted, but they have a fear, for example, or a banished demon for Incorporeal. Meanwhile, classes like warrior and death knight cannot deal with both of them. So, is it healthy to have this type of affix in the game? In general, even if we just exclude these two affixes and you just think about in general, is it healthy to have an affix that shapes the group composition of your Mythic Plus party? Because we have seen often many complaints about this affix, and it's not even from warrior and death knight players, right? You would expect, if everyone else can deal with these affixes and those two are the only cucked classes that cannot deal with both of them, to be the ones to come up with most of the complaints. But instead it's a healthy share of players across classes that have voiced their displeasure at both of these affixes. Some of these complaints are for different reasons. For example, plenty of healers are complaining about the dumping of the responsibility of the affix going on them, and the DPS players pretending like it's not their problem. The complaint of the way certain bosses or trash packs are designed, making it hard for you to deal with the affixes at the same time as the trash mobs. For example, Afflicted requiring a dispel often from a healer, and then the very same trash pack or the very same boss is casting a magic dispel on a player. So now the healer is split two ways on whether or not to dispel Afflicted or to dispel the player who is taking tons of damage from a dot. That's also one of the problems created by this affix. Incorporeal can create a completely different type of complaint. This is the geographically focused complaint, like the incorporeal mobs spawning in all sorts of different positions, making them even hard to reach. You have unfixed problems, like for example Incorporeal when fighting Galakron is impossible to be freezing trapped because Galakron's hitbox takes up the entire room. So if you drop a trap on top of the Incorporeal mob, it will still count as hitting Galakron. That's another problem. They might spawn up and down some stairs or around a corner, which is going to make it impossible for you to actually properly get in time, or just frustrating to reach in time. So both of these affixes, for multiple reasons, have been, scientifically speaking, using a proper term, they have been shat on by the community. So we are split two ways, while praising Blizzard for doing a good job pruning and removing many of the older, toxic and frustrating affixes, whether it was necrotic or whether it was explosive or whether it was certain features of current affixes which have been nerfed over time, and then also complaining about the two newly added affixes in the pool of Mythic Plus. Some players often go to a very much requested feature even after we have lost the seasonal affixes, of the kiss curse affix, of the buff affix, of the I do something but I get something in return, right? So for example, it could be like being able to dispel the afflicted mob gives you 5% haste. 10% haste gives you movement speed. Maybe it fears all the enemy mobs or stuns all the enemy mobs as you dispel it. So you might even add some skill ceiling, some skill expression in timing the dispel on the mob to interrupt the casts of the dangerous casts of the trash you're fighting, for example. None of that is happening, and this has been a popular request of players. You know, players used to feeling good during Prideful season, feeling good during Shrouded season, feeling good during Encrypted season, anything that makes you be more beefy, pump out more damage, etc, etc. Blizzard, in case you have missed the series of comments they made over time as to why they have removed this type of do something, get a buff in return, because it made balancing and scaling for high level keys of Mythic Plus harder, because it powered up and juiced up your character way more. So the only possible answer would have been, okay, if we want to keep these type of affixes in the game, we have to nerf all the players by like 20%. If you want to put in Mythic Plus buffs that will make you 20% stronger. And then how is it going to work with the raid? How is it going to work with PvP if those activities won't have these type of buffs? Do we have to also nerf all of the bosses by 20%? Because in the raid you won't get the damage buff you get in Mythic Plus. So it created this type of problem in Mythic Plus, and that's why they were removed. However, I still do believe that you can make positive affixes. You can make a give and take type of feature in Mythic Plus without making it overbearing. You don't need a 60% haste buff to feel good. You don't need to get your cooldowns back off 1 minute faster with Encrypted to feel good. It can also be something that is just a minor buff, but that can still praise you, can still pat you on the head if you played it properly. That is what I think would add more flair to Mythic Plus and also more enjoyment. Now, I don't want to get into the psychological part of the issue, but it is helpful to stimulate dopamine releases and endorphin releases of this feels good when you're doing Mythic Plus and you're performing tasks like dealing with affixes that feel good to do, So you are incentivized to do it over and over. So in Mythic Plus it could be good if instead of having to deal just with Afflicted possibly ruining your entire pool because of the debuff you would get if you fail to dispel it, if you also gain something positive if you did dispel it in time. If you want to be even more sadistic, we could make Sanguine give player a haste buff or a crit buff or a damage buff or healing buff overall if you stayed inside the Sanguine. Why not? Breaking Entangling should give you a buff. If you want to raise the skill ceiling, Breaking Entangling should give you a 30% damage reduction for like 2 seconds. So now you can sit on Entangling right before a big damage comes your way, and then you break it and you get 30% damage reduction. That's nice, it's cute, it incentivizes you to play well and to get rewarded for playing well. That's what I think should still be part of the Mythic Plus discourse even after we have gotten rid of positive affixes, the seasonal affixes which gave you some big reward if you did them properly. I don't think we have to stay still with the idea of only having big rewards stick in the minds of the players. I remember some dev comments from Ion himself pointing out that the rewards need to be big enough for the players to notice, otherwise they feel bad. I need to give you 30% haste for you to feel the reward, because if it's only 10% haste, it's not gonna feel as good. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think just the notion in your mind that you did a mechanic properly and you were rewarded for it is enough. Even if the buff is only 10% haste instead of 30, it is still a very big damage buff. That's what I think is an even bigger problem with Incorporeal and Afflicted than actually just the annoyance of not having that can crowd control or not having specs that can dispel. Is even the fact that you just get punished. If you fail, you just get massively punished, and if you deal with them, it feels like you had to deal with something extra annoying, which also made the encounter or the trash pack you were fighting even harder if you could have saved those buttons for something else. Like if you could have saved the dispels for dispelling something actually dangerous, rather than having to save them for one random affix mob that spawned. I think that's one of the bigger issues. Yes, we can then still talk about the biggest of the issues, which is we still have, at the end of the day, specs, if not entire classes that cannot deal whatsoever with these affixes. That remains the bigger problem. The fact that you cannot have one affix cut out from your Mythic Plus composition for the week an entire class, because they can't deal with it. Or you know that you're making your group weaker just because you're going to be inviting this warrior that cannot dispel and cannot use heavy crowd control on Afflicted or Incorporeal. That first in line needs to be fixed. Some of these could have been fixed very easily. For example, you could have given something like Stormbolt to a warrior, the ability to instantly remove one of the Incorporeal mobs, for example, or you could have changed Stormbolt to last 30 seconds on NPCs, on mobs, instead of players, for example. That could have also made it much more manageable in Mythic Plus. You could have perhaps added some lines, maybe on something like Death Coil of a Death Knight, to also work as a dispel for Afflicted, to allow DKs to have a dispel for this affix, for example. That's the first problem. If you have to talk about the state of these two affixes, first come having all of the classes have at least something to deal with them in some capacity. After that, we can talk about how annoying they can be, how restrictive they can be, or harder they can make your key without, again, not giving you anything in return, not giving you a buff, not giving you a bone to chew on because you were a good boy and you dealt with them properly and smoothly. I think this is still something that can make your Mythic Plus experience more entertaining, more engaging, more addictive, going inside a Mythic Plus key and being able to handle affix after affix after affix and get buffs in return. As I said, the buffs don't need to be massive, you don't need to feel like a god, like some of the Blizzard devs believe, to feel like you are having fun. You know, I would like to be able to deal with Afflicted and get some haste, to deal with Incorporeal and get some movement speed or even AoE splash damage on my abilities. I would like to break Entangling and get some damage reduction. I would like to also have things like Storming or Volcanic now also be able to hit NPCs, to hit enemies and actually damage them or stun them, interrupt them, for example. So you get rewarded if you can actually kite those mobs on top of those affixes, for example. All these minor things that can spice things up positively in your Mythic Plus key. So, as I said, even though the way affixes have been buffed, the way affixes have been smoothened out and nerfed and made more accessible throughout this Legion to Dragonflight track we had when it comes to Mythic Plus, I still think we have room to improve. We have room to go forward rather than what we have felt like with Incorporeal and Afflict, which kind of felt like going backwards a little bit in terms of how affixes have been developed in Mythic Plus. So let me guys know what you think about the state of the Mythic Plus affixes. Of course, no need to insult and berate Afflicted and Incorporeal. They have already been bullied enough. We are all happily bullying them every day, so no need to do it in the comments as well. Let me know what you would do to make the affixes in Mythic Plus smoother, and if you are part of the gang who would be okay, who would like to have more positive rewards for dealing with Mythic Plus affixes properly. On the beginning of this weekend, on Friday, we are now leaving each other once more. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and help to the growth of the channel, which can, as usual, still be given completely for free. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, oh god, the nose started twitching again at the very end of this video. Good thing I'm done.